Hello everybody and thanks for your time. I'm Chiara Uliana from the University of Granada in Spain. I'm hereby going to present my lecture. In this lecture I'm going to present the results of two types of analysis. The reasons I started this research for three main reasons, even though you can see more here. As a previous professor of Chinese language at the Confucius Institute, it seemed to me that the grammar contents, especially syntax, of the books and other teaching materials I used were not in line with what required for the HSK tests. Even though they were all defined basic intermediate, or intermediate. So in this way, I started this research to give my students a better service as a professor, better materials, and also with the aim to offer a clearer view of this issue to my fellow colleagues, professors of Chinese. To do so, I also needed to observe the actual state of the art of reading and listening comprehension at HSK 1, 2, and 3. And that's the reason for the first part, for one part of the first part of this research. I'm also interested in this research because Boyu and the Herzi, among other grammatical aspects, are considered by many experts quite a common feature to be used in modern Chinese. But according to the materials we used, most of them appear in early levels without any explanation of its use, and then later on they are briefly explained in an intermediate level, but nothing more. So what it seemed to me as a professor, it was not being studied enough in class at initial levels and seemed not required as like a basic feature in HSK tests. So I was wrong on this aspect, on the last one, as we will observe at the end of this lecture. Last but not least, I started this research with the hope to find some results to improve the passing rate of HSK tests, but also to improve reading comprehension and to open the possibility of a further analysis to compare the level required by HSK tests with the common European framework of reference for languages. More precisely, my idea was to find some relation between Boyu, Hertz, and grammatical aspects, study and passing rate, with the aim to observe whether it's profitable to introduce a more grammar-based teaching model for Chinese language in Spain. I am aware that the HSK tests are sometimes created thanks to the words frequency lists, and I do believe we should also take into consideration other aspects of the language to evaluate the fluency of a language apart from words frequency. I am also aware that there is a big difference between the need to understand something in a language for performing a task and use it actively to perform the task. In this in this lecture, we do not take this issue into consideration, but we will do it later on in the future part of this research. Throughout this lecture, I will mention sometimes teaching materials, which is another aim of my study here. With the results of this and other studies, I would like to improve some aspect of teaching materials as a second language materials used in Spain at the moment. So in the first part, we will see some numbers of participants, numbers of different nationalities present, number of languages spoken, and these last two aspects are important because Granada University is the first university in Europe for number of Erasmus students, and we wanted to see the impact of foreign languages or foreign nationals in the impact, on the exam. Ages of participants, number of participants that have passed and failed the test, and the passing rate divided between the two parts, Tingli and Yuedu, even if we are going to give Yuedu more importance. So the second part, we will see a language analysis, as I mentioned earlier. We will talk about 多语, Lichutz, and eventual level fluctuations. So let's start with HSK1. We start with the results of the participation rate for HSK tests in Granada. As we can see clearly that there has been a huge drop in 2017 from 103 participants in 2015 to 89 participants in 2016 to 48 participants in 2017 and 62 participants in 2018 and finally 57 last year. And even if I do not have the results of 2020, I can imagine the numbers to be even lower. So the same behavior is quite evident in HSK2, and it's just just in the last 2 years. While in HSK3, there is a drop in numbers in 2017 and 2019. So I also reached some collateral conclusions that maybe they're not directly related with what I wanted to find, but still I think they're quite useful. So considering this, what we've seen, the CI should investigate the reasons for such a drop and check if this is a worldwide trend or a national trend maybe that they share with other Confucius institutes, and if not, changes should be evaluated. Also because Granada is a very big university with more than 50,000 students, and the numbers of other languages proficiency tests are seemingly higher. So there is a need for a case study and to solve the drop in participation rate. I will give later on some tips, but the case should also be studied more specifically, taking into consideration the more specific data on the topic. Some possible reasons for the decrease are the lack of materials approaching the test requirements. And with this, I'm not saying that there are no materials that approach the test requirements. I'm saying that there is a lack of good materials. Materials interesting, that spark motivation. Okay. Then the second one, the lack of interest of the general student community towards Chinese language learning, the decrease of scholarships opportunities offered by Hanban, and the lack of publicity made by the center itself. So following this path, we will now see the presence of non-Spanish nationals that took the test. So from the results, you can see that here the non-Spanish nationals taking the test, the HSK tests in Granada are just few, 1% in HSK1, 2% in HSK2, and 3% in HSK3. So it is very clear from the results that, again, we are here finding some collateral results, conclusions, and some conclusions that are useful to my research. So there is a very small percentage of non-Spanish test takers, which is good for me because I want to study the reading comprehension among Spanish students. But on the other hand, the center needs to attract the non-Spanish nationals. So the CI should evaluate taking some measure to attract the non-Spanish nationals working and studying at the University of Granada, because they constitute a very small percentage of the test takers that we've just seen. So the CI is probably not very well known, I would say, in the student community, except made, of course, for the Oriental languages student community. And this is something that doesn't happen with other institutes of the same kind, like, let's say, Goethe Institute, Alliance Française, Instituto Dante Alighieri, etc. So all of these language and culture centers receive students from a very varied background, academic background, and national background too. So the CI should also enhance some measure to reach out to a more varied student community present at the university. For example, they could prepare more publicity in other languages like English, French, Italian, German. They should prepare more students-friendly activities, trying to reach out to a more different student community, probably showing the benefits of speaking Chinese as a second language, let's say working in a Chinese high-tech lab, living in China for research, for studies, doing sociological research, etc. On the side, I have to say also that in my experience in the university, there is no presence of the Confucius Institute out of the humanities and especially out of the Oriental languages studies. But this is, of course, another issue, and it's a personal experience. So, as expected from the previous results, we can now see. We can now see the languages spoken. Of course, it's as we could have imagined. There's a very low percentage of non-Spanish natives. So it's 1% in HSK1, 2% in HSK2, and 3% in HSK3. And we believe that the low participation rate of foreign nationals can also be influenced by the following reasons. Only one of the following reasons is related with the language, with the foreign language, and it's the first one. We believe that foreign students they fear not understanding properly the instruction that by law have to be given in Spanish until a certain level, B1, and thus fearing not knowing what part the participant is supposed or not supposed to do during the exam. So the other two parts, the other two conclusions are the test dates. Test dates are not. These two conclusions are not strictly related to the languages spoken, but still to the foreign presence in the HSK test status. So test dates do not take into consideration the arrival and living period of time for Erasmus students, and test dates usually follow the exam session date at the local university, so students are already overwhelmed with university exam. It's very unlikely that they are willing to add another test to the list. So those might be some of the reasons, for this drop. We will now see the age span of the participants, and again, it's quite evident that the 88% of the participants are between 10 and 30 years old, and considering this, we can make the following conclusions. Okay, test preparation. Sorry, I'll have to have it here. Okay, test preparation teaching materials and specific courses should take into consideration the behavior, background, interests, motivation, average learning speed, and test aim of this student community. For example, many of the teaching materials used nowadays in Spain to teach Chinese as a second language are adaptation of a simple translation from other languages, exception made for 3, Hanyu, Chino para hispanohablante, El Chino de hoy, and Chino paso a paso. So many of these book stories, for example, take place in China, a place that many of the students that use those teaching materials have never visited before. So sometimes they refer, for example, to the Chinese university life, which is very different to the Spanish university life. And so it's not easy to understand if not explained properly, which takes away teaching time and teaching resources and teaching energies. And this gives the professor an even bigger burden, and it creates another filter if not done very well, like mentioned by Krashen. So there is not a real differentiation in teaching materials for childhood, pre-adolescence, adolescence, and pre-adulthood. On the other hand, so what I'm saying here is that for this, from 10 to 30, we almost all use the same teaching materials, okay, and sometimes from 14 up it's the same. So on the other hand, the teaching materials are focused on non-Chinese nationals studying Chinese language in China. So interests and hobbies, to make an example of non-Chinese national, are rarely taken into consideration. For example, going to concerts, rock climbing, museums, conferences, going out for a drink, going out for coffee, going to the disco, etc. Okay? So teaching materials and language and culture contents in Spain are China specific. Okay, so on the other hand, language teaching should never miss the aim of its axioms, the reason why we study that language. So it's very important to understand the aim of this student community and act consequently. So what I mentioned before could be treated as one or some of the reasons for the lower participation rate. It's also quite evident from checking the orange part here, that it's quite evident that the higher the level, the fewer the participants under 20. So you can, if you focus on the orange part, HSK1 has 72%, HSK2 has 52%, and look, HSK3 has a 14%, which is very, very low compared to the rest. So this means that the higher the level, the more different the interests and the needs of the student community, and this is quite obvious if we're pedagogically analyzing this. So this should be taken into consideration again for teaching materials and specific courses. So let's go. These are my conclusions that I've already mentioned. When observing the passing and failing rate of HSK1 during the years, we can see there is only 5% failing rate, which is, I guess, quite good. It would be interesting to see the failing and passing rates of other languages in Granada and maybe also in other countries to make a comparison and make some conclusions, but at the moment I do not have access to those data. So you can see that for HSK2 it's 1% higher, and then for HSK3 it's a lot higher, it's 17%. So to summarize, we can see that there is an increase on failing rates from 5 to 6 to 17%, even though the failing rate is 9% as seen here. So let's see now the failing and passing rate divided between the two parts of the HSK, reading and comprehension and listening comprehension. We are not analyzing listening comprehension specifically here, but I've put these results to make a comparison. No, so if you see, of course, along the years, there's a drop. Okay, except there are some exceptions, but it's quite normal that there is a drop. Okay, except for HSK3. But what I'm interested in seeing here is the difference in between 阅读 and 听力. So as a conclusion to this part, we can say that while in HSK1, reading and listening comprehension are quite level, okay, because we have, let's say, 57 in 听力 and 66 in 阅读, or we have 39% here, and we have 43 in 阅读. For HSK2, it's the same. We have 听力, we have 36, and we have a 30% in 阅读. We have, I'm sorry, we have a 14 in 2019 in 听力, and then we have a 12. So, okay, it's quite the same behavior with HSK2, but then if we check HSK3, we have a 28% here, and then a 42, then we have a 30 and 41, then we have 48 and 51, then we have 25 and 30, then we have 34 and 52. So what I'm trying to say here that except for 2017, the Yuedu proficiency is higher than the Tingli proficiency, the higher the level. While in HSK1 and HSK2, the level is quite similar, let's say. So to summarize, we can see here some general conclusion for this part, which are probably the Confucius Institutes need to reach out to the international community at the university of the students at the University of Granada to, get more students taking the tests. They need to reach out to other fields, except for humanities. The main audience, the main group of test takers is persons from 20 to 30 years old. There's a high passing rate but lower participation over the years. So, but the most important thing, that's what we are interested in, is that Tingli proficiency is higher at lower levels if compared to Yuedu. So let's see the second part. Okay, so for the second part, I have analyzed 23 test papers, mixed them on the 3 levels, and in these papers I checked Buyu and Lihetzi. So at the beginning of my research in this field, I wanted to analyze also all the parts included in the HSK test, but due to the coronavirus, I had limited access to Tingli, so I focused my attention in the Yuedu part. Hopefully, I will have access to the Tingli during the following months, and I will be able to give a fuller view of the situation. So in the next slide, you will see a summary of the Buyu I looked for. And yes, I am totally aware that this is an aspect that it's in constant ongoing debates. There's a debate on these complements and on its existence, on its definition, on its category, etc. And which structure gets to be part of which category. So just to mention, I have put all 数量不语 under the same category just for practicality. Okay, because I am very aware that there are many inner differences, but for practicality here we've reunited them in the same group. Okay, so now you can see from this slide that there is a growth in Buyu presence in the test papers I have analyzed, but even if Buyu are almost never mentioned in the initial level materials for Chinese as a second language, they do actually appear here in HSK1. Usually at this level, Buyu are not mentioned as a grammatical feature. They appear in the word list as a word, as only one word. We can thus find 看见 translated as see, but non-specific grammatical behavior is mentioned. The same happens for 离合词, even if we are not talking about them right now, but it's the same for 离合词. Let's say 吃饭. So we can find 吃饭 translated as eat, but nothing more is mentioned. So I have looked for 不语离合词 in the test papers, and I found the following results. In HSK1, you find resultative, descriptive, and quantitatives 不语. With quantitatives, I mean 数量不语. Okay, so this is very interesting because according to my studies, resultatives are actually the first ones to be studied, to be introduced in a Chinese language initial level course. But descriptives, 青苔不语, are sometimes mentioned, sometimes are just mixed up with a degree Puyu, and sometimes they're not very well explained. While quantitative Puyu are usually not explained as such, they are usually given for granted, and they are not considered, or at least in the teaching materials, they are not explained as Puyu. We can observe, of course, that there is only one appearance or maybe two. So it's of Buyu in HSK1, of course. So its presence, it's not of a very high impact in the results, on the results. What I'm trying to say here, you can pass HSK1 without knowing, okay, the use of this feature, but still it's present. So now let's see HSK2. There is, of course, a higher frequency, and there is also a higher gap. In some occasions, Puyu are only 10, like you can see here in exam number 6, they're 10. Okay, and in some others, 17, like in exam 5 here. Okay, so here it sparks a question. It's not clear if this change make the test harder or easier, but it would be interesting to study this aspect, this shift. Again, we see from this graphic that the Puyu presence and it's quite wide, but again, the most common Puyu are the three ones I mentioned: resultatives, descriptives, and quantitatives in HSK2. But when we observe HSK3, first of all, we have to say we observe a very big difference, a very big fluctuation in Puyu presence. So the higher presence is in exam number 3, we found 38. And then the lower one is 14. Okay? So what happens here is it's that 14 is almost, the average rate of Puyu presence in HSK2. So, well, again, it sparks some doubts. Here in HSK3, we can finally find all the Puyu. Of course, sometimes there is a higher frequency of some categories. Let's say resultatives are always present. Let's say here number 2 there's more. Okay, but still at this level, at level HSK3, you are officially required to take the test. Here we cannot say that if you, as a student or as a test taker, you do not know how to use Puyu, you would be able to pass the exam. This is evidently not possible here. I would also like to mention here again that I'm not here to evaluate if HSK level compared to the framework is valid or not. I'm just here using HSK tests as a corpus to see the presence of Puyu and difference. So, talking about presence, okay? These are my conclusions. There are many resultatives in complements in HSK1. Okay, not many, mainly, okay? I mean that for HSK1, we should require the student to know resultatives. There's a high appearance of resultatives, descriptives, and quantitatives in HSK2. There's a full presence of all types of post-verbal complements in HSK3. And there is sometimes a variability in frequency. I can say here that Puyu needs to be studied at initial levels. So let's see Li He Zi now. Okay, we have 0 to 1, not 1 to 0. Okay, appearances of leaflets in HSK1, 3 to 7 in HSK2, and 6 to 13 in HSK3. So the same thing as I mentioned before. For HSK1, maybe we do not need to know leaflets perfectly to pass the test, but definitely in HSK3 we would need it. So the interesting thing is that I also checked for specific syntax changes and structures, and here you can see some. Like you have here in black, you have the verb, the predicate. In green, you have the 不语, and in purple, you have the object. So it's quite evident for if you're a syntactician that there's object movement and that it's very important at this level for HSK 1, 2, and 3 to know the particle positions. Maybe not to understand, again, I've already mentioned this, we're not talking about performing the task, but it's important to know, okay? So my conclusions for this part are that object movement and particle positions with 不语 and 离合词 should be studied at initial levels, giving importance to the syntactic changes. My general conclusions that you can now see on the screen are that there are mainly Spanish native test takers. So if we consider an error analysis in the future, we just should take this into consideration, but also for materials revision and creation. There has been a decrease in test takers numbers, and something should be done about this, I guess. 不语 and 离合词 should be considered basic grammar features and not advanced or not intermediate. 不语 and 离合词 should be taught at initial levels, at least until what is now considered HSK3, and not intermediate or advanced, and even taking into consideration the remarks made by various authors where they say HSK5 would be a B1 or maybe B2. We can say HSK, in any case, we can say HSK1, 2, and 3 can be placed in an A1, A2 level according to the common European framework, and thus seeing the high presence of 母语 and 离合词, we conclude that they have to be considered basic grammar features. And I hope in the future they will be taught at initial levels and not intermediate or advanced levels when they are even considered for its teaching. Sometimes they are just overlooked. So syntactic changes or shifts should be considered an important feature and thus studied at earlier levels. And the teachers should be very prepared on this topic. While in some cases, Spanish native language positive influence can be of help if we are talking about Spanish natives, as we are in this case. It is usually an issue for Spanish students to be able to produce and or understand correctly these kind of structures, which include one object and some other kind of post-verbal complements. 补语. So this should be evaluated even when creating new teaching materials. Teaching training programs, teaching plans, materials, etc. should take into consideration these results. None of the above mentioned syntax changes given by the presence of these two elements, 离合词 and or 补语, in a Chinese sentence have been found in teaching plans or teaching materials. And hopefully it will be in the future. I am actually preparing teaching materials at the moment to try to fill this void. So I've reached my conclusions, but I would also like to make a final remark, which is this. Sometimes, while analyzing Huyu and Ifatsu, I found the importance of having a good grasp of Chinese culture and society to pass the test or to understand the task. For example, it's important to know the difference, the cultural difference between mi fan and cai, or fan and cai. To answer something like the question you see here, because there's a little difference in Spanish, I guess, in Italian too. In Spain, the concept of first and second course are present, that it's not very cared for. They can eat rice as second, and rice can be considered cai, with the meaning of ración, plato, like a pan of something, like a dish. So due to the habit of having rice in many different fashions, sometimes Spanish students consider mi fan a cai. So of course they wouldn't be able to answer correctly to this question. So these are different concepts, and if not understood properly and or explained properly by the professor or teacher, it might lead to an error which is not strictly related to language. And for me, this is all for today, and thank you for your time. If you have any questions, this is my contact. And again, thank you for your time and have a nice day.